All right, good morning. Let's do this. Come on, 1 second. All right, we're going to get started here in a few minutes and wait for everyone else to join in. All right, we got two in here. Hi, Chris. Shariah, all right. We're going to get started here in a second. Just check. All right. Messages did go out. Perfect. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Who all do I have in here? You can type in the chat bar. I know I have Soraya. Good morning. All right, guys, I'm going to give it about 2 more minutes and we're going to get started. All right. Very quickly, when you get done with this, there will be a video already up on YouTube that goes along with this lecture. All right. Hello, Layla. All right. Hello. Okay. Hello, Gavin, Talon. Good morning. Give you guys a couple more minutes and we're going to get started. All right, Carly's about to join. Okay. All right, we're down to 3. All right, here we go. All right, guys, good morning and welcome to class. It is 8:04, so we're a little bit behind, but we're going to go ahead and get started now. Make sure you're paying attention. If you have questions, you can use the live chat bar. I'll get with you guys as soon as possible. If you don't have a subscription to YouTube and you need to get a hold of me via a question, you can always send me a question through the chat feature in Microsoft Teams, and I can answer that there. All right, guys, so let's get moving forward. Today, we're going to be talking about the relationships of the Greek city-states. So as of right now, we've established that the Hellenistic period has started. It's come out in Athens, and people are starting to grow their city-states there. And for the next about 100 years, following the fall of the Mycenaeans and the Minoans, people are inhabiting the Greek mainland, and they're establishing their city-states. We see places like Corinth, like Thebes, like Sparta, like Athens, starting to pop up all over ancient Greece. And so we have these city-states that are there. Now, there's a couple problems with this, and I'm going to ask you guys a question and see if you can respond by typing in the live chat, and then we'll talk about it after I see some answers. So get ready to type. So when it comes down to it, guys, what was the relationship like between city-states, let's say in Mesopotamia? We're going to use Mesopotamia as a reference here. When it came to resources, were they very abundant and they didn't need to fight over them, or were they not that abundant and they ended up fighting over them, or did they just end up fighting over them because people are greedy? So just kind of think about that, answer that question. So what was the relationship between the city-states and resources in Mesopotamia? You can go ahead and type that into the answer over there in the live chat bar. I kind of want to see what you guys think. So what was the relationship between the Mesopotamian city-states when it came specifically, when we're talking specifically about resources, so things like food and water? They did something specific of the water, if you remember correctly. Remember I told you guys about it. Give you guys a couple of seconds to answer. So what do you guys think? What was the relationship between the city-states in Mesopotamia and their resources? What did they do? Did they share them or did they fight over them? Not what the resources are, but what did they do for those resources? Did they share them or did they fight over them? Yeah, exactly, Gavin. They definitely fought over them. They didn't like it when each other had resources. In fact, we can see that some city-states in Mesopotamia would end up damming up the river and preventing water from going down to the city-states farther downriver. So they were preventing each other from having those resources, which were essential for life. I mean, when you cut off water in somewhere like Mesopotamia, it's a very hot, dry climate. They're going to end up dying, right? So they ended up fighting over those resources a lot. So when we look at a place like Greece, which doesn't have the abundant resources that we have in Mesopotamia, what could possibly be the reaction? What would the Greeks have done? Okay, they have limited resources. Remember that. There's really nowhere to farm. There's very little farmland. That's correct, Alex. They definitely fought over the resources. In ancient Greece, even more so than Mesopotamia. They definitely fought over those resources. Those were extremely valuable. When we talk about resources in ancient Greece, we're talking about the ability to farm because most of it's covered in mountains, if you guys remember. Someone throw up a figure. Do you remember how much of ancient Greece is covered in mountains? Remember, it's a lot. Let's see if you guys can remember. How much of Greece was covered in mountains? Let's see. Can anybody remember? Faith, how much of ancient Greece was covered in resources? 75%, Talon? Yeah, that's pretty close. That's pretty close. It's actually 5/7 of Greece was covered in mountains. So it's a lot of mountains in ancient Greece. It's so much so that only about 20% of the land there can even be farmed. All right. So it's a lot of land covered in mountains in ancient Greece. And that makes it difficult to farm. That makes it difficult to travel. That just really limits what you can do. So the Greeks, that's why they looked to the sea to begin with, right? The first thing they did was they went out into the ocean. They went to those islands, and they used those islands in the Aegean Sea to really support their growth. They continued to do that during this period. So during the Hellenistic period, during these city-states starting to form, it's also the Iron Age, they are staying put, and they're also colonizing. So a colony is a group of people that leaves their homeland and journeys out to continue the growth of that homeland. So the United States was a colony. We talked about that. We called the 13 colonies when we were first founded, and we changed those colonies into the United States of America. We won our War of Independence from the British, but for a while we belonged to the British. The same thing here. The Greeks are sending out groups of people to go colonize islands. They still belong to those city-states. So when Athens sends people out, they still belong to Athens, but they still help bring in resources. They still help bring in trade, and that is their new position. So we see these Greek city-states, they start competing for resources. That actually makes them hate each other. All right. The Greeks are similar. They all speak Greek. All right. That is one of the weird things about studying ancient Greece is everybody speaks the same language. Everyone has the same religion. Everyone has pretty much the same ideas that if you're Greek, you're a really organized and civilized person. The Greeks believed if you weren't a Greek, you were terrible. All right. You could almost use the term racist, but it's not in the sense here. They were very elitist. They were very nationalistic. They believed that their civilization was the best type. All right. If you weren't a Greek, you were a barbarian. The Romans were much the same way. If you weren't a Roman or a Greek, you were a barbarian. All right. So the Greeks were like, well, look, if you're not a Greek, you're a barbarian. Doesn't matter if you're Egyptian. Doesn't matter if you are a Mesopotamian. Doesn't matter if you're a Jew. It doesn't matter. You are a barbarian because you are not Greek. You don't speak our language. You don't share our culture. You don't worship our gods. Therefore, you are a barbarian. And that really limits their ability to deal with other people, and we'll discuss that here in a few minutes. So the Greeks start really not liking each other because they're competing for the same resources, fishing resources, land resources. They're all competing for it all at the same time. And that leads to a lot of internal warfare. It leads to a lot of deals being struck, and they went out and they'd go fight each other. And so you'd see a state like Sparta go fight Athens. They would actually agree upon where they were going to fight. So they would look around and they'd say, hey, let's go over here to this field. We're going to fight here. One big battle. We'll get it over with. If we win, we get this. If you win, you get that, right? It was always just quick, bloody, deadly battles, and that solved their problems for the most part, except they hated each other, so they'd go back and they'd do it again. They were constantly competing with each other for those resources. They were constantly tricking each other, creating problems for each other. They really didn't like each other. This leads us into them continuing to spread out. So they believe that they are the greatest people ever. They hate each other, right? Sparta hates Athens. They're both Greek, but they both hate each other. So they start pushing out, all right? They start expanding. Sparta doesn't expand so much. They're located internally on the Greek mainland, And so they actually spend most of their time going and raiding other city-states and taking people as slaves and making them work on the farms in Sparta. So Sparta kind of, we're going to put them aside for a little bit, and we're going to focus on Athens and Corinth. Now, Athens and Corinth are actually very close to each other. They both really didn't like each other. Corinth had two seaports. Athens only had their one major seaport. But Athens really developed this ability to develop really good soldiers and really good sailors, all right? So when I talk about Athens being focused on sailing, that doesn't mean they didn't have good soldiers. They, in fact, had great soldiers. They're probably the second best soldiers on Greece besides the Spartans. They just focused on other things as well, right? They've got really, really, really good at sailing. And so the Athenians would spread out, and they spread out as far as they could. In fact, they invaded and colonized an area called Anatolia. Now, Anatolia would eventually become part of Turkey, or that time Persia. All right, so they moved out to there. They used those resources there. They refused to follow the laws of the Persians there, and that is where they chilled out. So the Athenians spread out. Now, at the same time, we're going to fast forward a little bit. So around 505 BC, we see major changes in Athens. And that is because a guy by the name of Cleisthenes, which you'll see later in the video that I've already put up on YouTube, created something called democracy, or for him, he called it Democratus. Democratus meaning dema means people, kratos means power. So power to the people, Democratus, or democracy. So Cleisthenes goes out and he says, look, if you're a free man, so if you're not a slave, if you're a free man, meaning male, then you can participate in the government. You can vote. You can be elected into office. You can only serve for 1 year. And they switched out a lot. There were councils of over 500 people. And so that is where we see Cleisthenes start to really change the government. All right. So they start changing the government in Athens to be a democracy. So they started voting on everything. Guys, they voted on what color the signs of the town should be. They voted on how long the road should be. They voted on everything. They also voted on important things like, hey, should we go to war? Should we go fight somebody? This is where we really start seeing that Athens is growing. They're changing. The problem with when you vote on everything is it gets really boring. Could you imagine sitting in a meeting and all you did all day was pick up either a white rock or a black rock? A white rock signified a yes vote. A black rock signified a no vote. So if they approve something, you pick up your rock, you put it in a bowl, and that was your vote. And so they had to change that system over time. It got kind of corrupt. I mean, what stops you from putting, 10 painted white rocks in your pocket and dropping all 10 in a jar? All right. So they actually had some issues. They had to figure out how to make sure people weren't cheating these votes. But Athens is growing democracy. And the democracy that we celebrate today, that we participate in today, directly comes from ancient Greece. All right. So, hey, Gavin, pay attention. Stop, figure out who's who. Okay. Now, when we start moving out of ancient Athens, we're going to start looking around them. So we already see the Greeks aren't getting along with each other, right? They don't get along. They can't get along. And they start moving a little bit far out of their realm. They start colonizing into what is the Persian Empire. Now, let's talk about the Persians. The Persians at this time were the strongest empire in the world. They had conquered everything. And when I say everything, they conquered all the way into India. They conquered down into ancient Egypt. They were massive. They were a massive, massive, massive empire, and they were a true threat to the Greeks. I'm actually going to show you a picture of it. No one wanted to mess with the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire was 100% different than the Greeks. The Persians spoke lots of different languages. The Persians had lots of different races of people, different belief systems, different ideas. The Persians really were a completely different type of ancient civilization. And I'm actually going to show you my screen, what that looked like. Give me 1 second. I got to move the image over so it's a little bit clearer for you guys. Whew, bless me. All right. Okay. This, well, can you guys, oh, I'm not doing it right. All right. That is the Persian Empire. It's massive. We can see Greece, we can see Sparta, Sparta, and it goes all the way past Babylon into India. So it was a massive, massive, massive empire. It really was a game changer in the ancient world. I mean, they had soldiers, they had lots of men. In fact, the historian Herodotus referred to the army that the Persians had that was over 1 million men strong. Now, yes, they did take over the Assyrians. They crushed the Assyrians. They crushed everybody until a little group of Greeks decided to invade a town called Miletus. And they took over the town. And they imposed their own laws. And they destroyed some of the Persian temples. And this really angered the Persians, especially a Persian in particular by the name of Darius. Now, Darius had been the Persian who took over the Assyrians. He was the one that had invaded. He's the one that had made this great empire. And he's like, hey, who are these little flies on the backside of my giant empire? Who the heck would do this in my land? Don't they know who we are? We're the Persians. And the Greeks were like, wait, you're not Greek? You're lesser than us? You're a barbarian? We don't care who you are. This is going to set up a major conflict. The Persians are going to invade, and they're going to attack Greece. Now, the original invasion was carried out by sea, so they couldn't carry that many men. The 1 million men that Herodotus talks about probably weren't 1 million. It was probably closer to 300,000, which is still a big number. Don't get me wrong. That's a huge number. It's much larger than all the Greek city-states put together. But they're going to come after Greece. And they're going to come after specifically Athens. Because during this battle, during this rebellion that they threw in Persia, the Greeks are going to pay. And the Persians are going to make them pay. They're going to come back with a massive army, and they're going to crush the Greeks. Or at least that's what the Persians want. The Greeks, on the other hand, are going to fight them in a much different way. And now we're going to talk about the Greek soldiers. So the Greeks developed a type of warfare that is specific to ancient Greece. And it's actually a type of warfare that really changed the way that we fight wars even up until the 1900s. So the Greeks really changed the way warfare was done. And so what the Greeks did is they said, look, we need decisive battles. We need them to be decisive, meaning we need a clear winner and a clear loser very quickly. And we're going to do this in the most deadly and most violent way possible. We're going to fight hand to hand in close combat. So the Greek soldiers were outfitted with a giant shield. All right. It was 3 feet in diameter being the line that runs through the middle. It was 3 feet diameter. It's huge. All right. It was made out of bronze, and they would carry that on their left shoulder, all right, on their left arm. On their right, they carried a giant spear. All right. It was about 6 feet tall. It had a spear point on the front end of it and a spear point on the end of it. The bottom spear point was called a lizard skewer. And the goal was if your front of your spear broke off, you could just flip it around and you could use the back. How heavy? It could weigh up to 20 pounds sometimes. Gavin, they tried to reduce some of the weight. It was massive. And so they designed this kit to fight. They had armor. A lot of times it was a breastplate to cover their upper body. They didn't really carry anything to cover their legs except for their shins, which they wore greaves. They're like shin pads made out of metal. And they carried protection for their wrists and a helmet. They had a helmet as well. Besides that, that is their outfit. That was their kit. That's how they fought. They wore their togas underneath it, and it really gave them an advantage in warfare. especially when they were fighting each other. What the Greeks would do is they'd line up in long lines. I'm going to have a video for you guys to see this later on. It's something I really want to teach you guys to do at school. But they would line up in a long line. They each had a shield. They would overlap their shields and they'd make a line. The guy behind them would carry a spear. His job was to spear people that ran into the line of shields. And the guys behind him were responsible for making sure the formation wasn't knocked over. So they were called the guys. They would push. They'd push the line forward to make sure they wouldn't fall backward. So these shield lines would run into each other. They would hit each other with spears, and they would fight. Oftentimes, they wouldn't resort to the dagger. If they had to, they would. They carried a short sword about that long, which is more of a dagger, and they would pull that out if they had to. So what color? Most of the times, they're made out of bronze, so they didn't paint the bronze too much. They painted design on it. A lot of the times, you would see the alpha symbol painted on their shield, or something like that. It just depended. If they were in a certain clan or a certain tribe, they may have a specific design painted on their shield. It just depended on who it was. So they could customize that a little bit. The Spartans there would wear long crimson capes, and they would wear red underneath their armor, so you couldn't tell if they were bleeding. The Romans would copy that as well. So you never knew if they were bleeding. That was a trick they used. The British did the same thing. That's why we called them the Redcoats. So Sparta is the greatest example of building an army. No, they did not have spikes on their shield. So the Spartans started at, before your guys' age, start training their kids to be soldiers. They would be taken from their homes around 7. They'd be put into the barracks, and there they'd begin their training. Would start with rigorous training. They learn how to fight with a shield. They learn how to fight with a spear and a sword, and they begin this training from the time they were 7 till about the time they were 20. When they get into their 20s, they'd be sent off to go fight. The Spartans were always fighting, whether it was another Greek city-state or they were going off to invade somewhere else in the region. Most of the time, it was Greek city-states. So they learned how to fight from a very early age. So the Greeks were very much into this one decisive, bloody battle. Lots of people using heavy infantry. Heavy infantry means they're soldiers on the ground. They carry certain shields and swords, and they're designed to be slow, but they're very, very, very tough. It's a lot of tough fighting. This is really good stuff. So the Persians, though, guys, when we talk about the Persians, their army is not built like this at all. In fact, their army is much lighter. They use cavalry a lot. They use a lot of bows and arrows, and they're designed much more so to be very quick. They're designed to be very advantageous of attacking flanks. They've never fought an army like the Spartans. They've never fought an army that really capitalizes on using a unit instead of an individual. So when it comes to the Greeks, they fought as a unit. They fought as one defined group of people. They didn't fight individually. It wasn't like you see in the movies where you see 2 or 3 people pairing off against each other. No, this was one long line. In fact, it wouldn't look that interesting if you saw 2 Greek city-states fighting each other. You just see these shields collide and the people try to stab each other over the shields. But when you saw the Greeks fight somebody that wasn't Greek, it was unbelievable. It was like running into a wall of iron and sharp, pointy things. It was bloody, and especially if you fight someone like the Persians who aren't wearing any armor. All right, guys, the Persians weren't wearing armor. They didn't carry shields made out of brass. They carried shields made out of pretty much plant-like material that had been weaved together. So they'd woven shields. And they're great for stopping arrows, but they can't stop a spear point. All right? They can stop a little bit of force, but a lot of force is going to go straight through it. So the Persians are absolutely unequipped for fighting the Greeks. And we're about to see how bad that can get when we get next week into developing our projects on, when we start developing our products on Greek warfare. So in fact, I'm going to go ahead and explain that now. So what I've done, guys, is I've left you a video on YouTube prior to this talking about how democracy came to Athens. You're going to watch that video today, and I'm going to actually have a quiz that goes along with that video and along with this lecture. So you're going to have a quiz that combines both of those things. So my lecture plus that video that I've left you. Of course, you can rewatch this to get any information you need. So the quiz is going to be over, type of kit that they wore in battle. It's going to be over relationships between the Greek city-states. It's going to be specifically over how democracy started in ancient Greece. It's going to be how did the Greeks upset the Persians so much that they wanted to invade. So we'll talk about that. If you guys want to do future research, all you need to do is get online. I absolutely recommend Ancient EU as a great source for finding information. So I'm going to be on for the next 30 or so minutes answering questions that you guys may have if you missed something during the lecture. But officially, this lecture is over. I'm going to end the stream, and then I'm going to start it back up as a help session. So if you guys want to be in that help session, just sit tight and see when I open back up. But I want to end this video so that if you missed the lecture, you can always come back in and rewatch that. So I'll see you guys here in a few minutes. Thank you for participating today.